Sairam. Sairam, dear brothers, sisters, elders. Welcome to the third edition of our Samarpan program from Sarva Dharma Service Center here in the village of Farmingdale in Howell Township, New Jersey. Today we are very proud and excited to introduce the speaker for the month, who is our dear sister, Dr. Ronne Marantz. Dr. Marantz has earned a doctorate in education, in curriculum and instruction from Columbia University Teachers College of New York. She has a very interesting dissertation topic. The first part of that is a mouthful of words. The last part is the more interesting for us, at least. So her topic was an analysis of the implementation of a curriculum innovation for character development. So the next part is more interesting for us, and it was on Satya Sai education in human values. And this is published in University Microfilms International in October of 1991. She also completed her master's in special education from Long Island University, New York, and she did her BA in elementary education from Queens College, City University of New York. Professionally, Dr. Marantz is a retired principal of the Heathcote Elementary School in one of the most sought-after districts in this country, namely the Scarsdale School District in Westchester County, New York. She was also the principal of the Woodstock Elementary School in Woodstock, New York. She was an adjunct professor of Graduate School of Education, Long Island University. And she was a teacher for classroom, special education, English as a second language for K through 12, and for the gifted and talented. From the Satya Sai organization perspective, she was a member of Sri Satya Sai World Foundation Education Committee from the year 2005 until 2012. She was a founding member, Institute of Satya Sai Education, ISSE of USA. She was involved in the SSCHV UN Habitat Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene Education projects in India, Gabon, Senegal, and China. She was also an ISSE trainer in Canada, UK, Colombia, Venezuela, and Argentina. With Swami's grace, Dr. Marantz first traveled to Prashanthi Nilayam for his darshan in the summer of 1979. She had long heard of his advent and miracles from her sister, Michelle Kaplowitz, who lived in Prashanthi from 1969 until 1971. During that time, her mother, Libby Malvin, had also visited and returned with stories of his leelas that were intriguing, but at the same time quite unbelievable to a young woman who had just finished her undergraduate degree in elementary education and was struggling to raise two children in a world she found confusing and difficult to navigate. In 1974, Swami came in a dream and took her to her past life in Assisi, Italy, which would begin the inquiry into what is real and what is not. The details of Dr. Marantz's transformational dream, subsequent events, her over 35 visits to Prashanthi Nilayam in a span of 3 years, and then his personal divine guidance over those years is lovingly documented in her book, The Power of Love, A Teacher's Life with Satya Sai Baba, which is published by the Sri Satya Sai Publication Trust and is available at the Satya Sai Book Center of America, as well as in Prashanthi Nilayam. So without much ado, I would like to have Dr. Marantz come over and give us a talk on her experiences. We really look forward to sharing that.
I have to say, thank you very much for that beautiful, beautiful introduction, and many thanks to everyone who has made this possible at the Sarva Dharma Center, this beautiful, magnificent, holy center. Humbled and tremendously grateful to be here. With Swami's grace is the only way I can open this talk. As I heard you speak and describe this lifetime of this jiva, this individual, the tears came to my eyes as if it was someone else. It's just no words can describe the grace that this life has been. And I have to say, it all started, you have to say, in truth, it all started with the inevitable pain and suffering that comes with this life when we are still in ignorance of our true nature. And so that's an inevitable part, an important part of life, is the confusion, the pain, the suffering, to go through that, and to continue the self-inquiry into the questions, who am I? What is real? What is permanent? What is impermanent? How should I live this life? What is the purpose of this life? And what is the way to self-knowledge? I'm going to frame this talk with those questions, because those are the questions that, with Swami's grace, all of the leelas and experiences that I had with him, the purpose was to answer those questions. So we have that on the next slide. You can bring that up so that people can impress upon themselves, our listeners, what those questions will be. Who am I? What is real? What is permanent, impermanent? How should we live life? What is the purpose of life? And what is the way to self-knowledge? So we'll start with the next slide, which is titled, Who Am I? So, as was mentioned, my sister Michelle had traveled to see Satya Sai Baba in Prashanti Nilayam in late 60s, early 70s. She was part of those young adults who traveled from the United States and subsequently from all over the world. And she would write me letters about what her experience was there. I was living in Canada at the time. I was newly married. I was having babies. And I found her letters totally unbelievable. And if I remember correctly, I don't think I read the rest through. Once she told me about the miracles, and he could come in dreams, and all of that phenomena. Totally, I had to tune that out. However, as my life continued to become more confusing, and I was separating from my husband eventually, she came back from India, and she came back literally a changed person. She went off as confused, as erratic in her thinking and emotions as I. But now she returned calm, full of determination to live her life with kindness, compassion, sweetness. And this, I later learned, is what character, it's the substance of character. Of course, the word character wasn't predominantly wasn't in my mind or my head. But later through Swami, I would come to realize that this is the substance of character. This is human values. So she came back. Miracles were not the important thing to me. What was important is how she was beginning to live her life. So, and shortly after that, my mother went. My mother actually went to see her prior to that, because my mother, after like a year that my sister was there, my mother was feeling, where is my daughter? I don't know, what condition is she in? This seems like a good man, this Satya Sai Baba, but what is she doing there? And if she's not coming to me, then I'm going to go to her. To him, and to her. And so when she got there, the very first thing that happened at the very first darshan was this white light came from Swami into her. And this is in her own words when she came home to tell me her experience and told me her experience. And I knew he was God. There was God. And so my mother, to me, was a little more credible than my sister. So her stories, she also told me a very quick one. You know, I could run out of time because there's so many sweet, sweet, sweet little stories. But she told me a few of the exchanges that she did have with this Satya Sai Baba, as I called him at the time, in interview. And he said, "What is your name?" And she said, "Libby," and which actually means love in Hebrew. Liba means love in Hebrew. And what is husband's name? Husband, Sydney. Libby. So Swami says, "Libby, Sydney, Libby." And he laughed. He just laughed. My mother laughed. And when my mother came home and told me this story, this touched me so deeply that through this little vignette, this little exchange, this little humorous exchange, at least I heard what I got from that was the insignificance of this ego personality. I couldn't have put it in words. What actually impressed me? Subsequently, once I became a serious inquirer of those questions, who am I and what is real, what is permanent, I came to realize what that actually meant to me. So, who am I? So in this way, I gradually opened up to the idea of Satya Sai Baba. And I started reading the very first Satya Sai Speaks, #1. Michelle had brought back from India, and my mother actually had a copy in her house, I think. And I would open it up. I was in school to get my bachelor's degree. I'd gone back to school at night. And I would open up the book every now and then, and I would, whatever I read, whatever sentences, paragraph, was just what I needed to hear to support me through my struggles at the time. And I also recognized that there was a wisdom in what I was reading that didn't compare to anything that I was reading in academia. And so one day, I always did yoga. I always did, asana yoga. And one day, I was sitting down to do some yoga, and for the first time, I prayed to this Satya Sai Baba, if you are who you say you are, if you are who my sister, my mother believe you to be, then bring me to you slowly and teach me how to love. Where did those words come from? I have to continuously go back in this talk to Swami's grace. Those words were implanted in my soul. It did not come from this ego personality, Ronne Marantz. So with that, shortly after that, I had a dream. And in this dream, now remember, this is back in 1974. I think I had maybe seen a very small little picture of Satya Sai Baba in a little black and white photo, but that's all. And in this dream, I dreamt that I woke up. And I got out of bed in the dream, and I knew that the Satya Sai Baba was in the house. And so I opened the door, and I peeked in. It was an open space kind of house, living space, where from the bedroom you could see into the main open area. And I could see that the Satya Sai Baba was sitting in the living room, although his back was to me. He was sitting in a chair in the living room, facing a window. There was another chair opposite him, but I didn't know how to enter the room. My feeling was, how do you enter the room of such a holy man? And with that, he began to communicate inside. And the message was to, as a child, come to me as a child. And with that, I was able to walk into the living room and sit in the chair opposite him. And as soon as I sat down and looked at him, my eyelids were automatically closed shut. And again, Satya Sai Baba, Swami, began to communicate. And what he spoke, they were not words. These were not words. This was subliminal. He communicated, "You cannot look upon me through your own will. It is only through my grace." And with that, my eyelids opened. And then I could actually, gaze at him for an instant. He was in full orange, glorious, full hair persona, which when I went to Prashanti Nilayam 5 years later, that's what he looked like. But I had not seen a photograph of that. And he then stood up and he communicated, "I am going to take you to the origin of your fears." And then I stood up also, and he drew me into him, and we became one entity. And with that, we traveled in time and space. We traveled past lives in time and space. Now, I did not believe in past lives prior to this dream. None of anything that was happening was familiar to me, but there was no thought at that time. There was no thought about anything like that. He drew me into him. We traveled in time and space, and then we landed, as it were. We stopped, as it were, I would say, in a church the size of this room, a little narrower, but in length, I'll call that length, length about the same. And it was rough-hewn stone, and there was an earthen floor, and there were no ornaments of any sort. And there on the floor, there were a half a dozen abandoned, very, very young children. And he indicated that I had been one of those children. They were in that life. And with that, we then went to let us say that this is the back of the church. The only thing other than the rough-hewn stones in this church was a wooden door, one of those round-shaped wooden doors. And we went through it. We didn't open it. We just went through the open door. And we were this church was at the high end of a hill. And it was the middle of the day. There were rolling green, magnificent hills all around, beautiful blue sky. And there was, at the bottom of the hill, there were 6 horses in a circle. And Swami separated from me at that point, and he entered into the lead horse and communicated, "I cannot take you any further. You wouldn't understand." And with that, I woke up. And I knew that this was not an ordinary dream. I knew that this was a dream in which he had come as a visit. I knew that he would take me to the origin of my fears. And I was very fearful in those days, fearful about my financial security, my social security, my family life. And I had existential fears about, not the question, who am I, hadn't come to my head so much as I couldn't make sense out of this, out of life. I couldn't make sense out of it, and it scared me. It actually scared me. One of the things that scared me, interestingly enough, when I say it was an existential fear, was just the diversity. The diversity was overwhelming to me. But nevertheless, he said, "I will take you to the origin of your fears." And needless to say, that is chronicled in this book. This book chronicles, the book that I wrote, The Power of Love, chronicles all the way to the origin of those fears, which I won't go into now except to make a very quick little statement. As long as we are identified with this personality, this narrow little I, ego personality, then feel separate from anything, there will always be some fear. When we know that we are one with everything, and that everything is divine, and that everything that is divine love, fear ceases. So after that dream, there's a couple of pictures of Assisi that come up next. One of the things that I knew, how did I know? So I knew that this was St. Francis. I knew that I had a dream that I didn't see St. Francis in the dream, but I knew that I'd had a life as a child who was taken in as part of the good works of the brothers. They called themselves the Band of Brothers at that time that Francis had started. And that in those days, children who were deformed or mentally deficient or for other reasons were actually abandoned in the countryside by their parent or parents. They were abandoned and left to die. And that was one of the good works that these monks did, the brothers did, was to take in these children. Now, I didn't really know all of that. I knew a little bit about St. Francis, mostly because when I was 13, I had discovered the prayer of St. Francis. I come from a Jewish background. There's actually some very, very Orthodox members on my mother's side, and some very secular members on my father's side. So when somebody gave me a bookmark, and on that bookmark was this prayer of St. Francis when I was 13. And Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is doubt, faith. Despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy, etc. And as soon as I read that prayer, that became my prayer. Because I had prayer in my life as a child, with a little confusion about it. There was, the discrepancy between my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family. But I was drawn to prayer, and this particular prayer became my life's prayer. So when I had this dream, I knew that this had to be St. Francis. And of course, I told my mother, I told my sister, no one else. They were both thrilled for me. You can see that church. That photo is a little exaggerated, as many photos often are, in terms of the length of the church. But otherwise, the scope of that church, that is exactly the church that Swami took me to. And it was, there were no, benches or anything like that. There was no sacristy. But that was essentially, and it did not have such a pointed cathedral ceiling at the time. So yes. So many years later, not many, well, yeah, actually quite a few years later, after I made my first trip to Prasanthi Nilayam, Dr. Hislop who was at the time the head of the organization in the United States, who was actually the founder of the organization and head of the organization in the United States. He started a project that somebody got me involved in, because I was not involved in the Psi organization in any way when I first returned after that, in those days before I had actually gone, and even after the first visit. It only took the second visit, 1981, before I got involved in the Psi organization. But he started a project to organize the few Satya Sai Speaks at the time by topic. And so I was given the Satya Sai Speaks volume 3, I think. One of my topics was surrender, and the other, I think, was fear, oddly enough. And so, and you would put them on index cards, and you would go through the whole book, and you'd put it by topic, and then you'd send it to him. Now, I don't believe anything ever came of that project. Nevertheless, I kept 2 index cards. Of all of the index cards that I collected for that, 2 struck me as very important messages to me. And that's this one here on the next slide. You must have, it's okay. You must have freedom not only from fear, but freedom from hope and expectation. Trust in my wisdom. I do not make mistakes. Love my uncertainty, for it is not a mistake. It is my intent and will. Remember, nothing happens without my will. Be still. Do not ask to understand. Do not want to understand. Relinquish understanding. So at that time in my life, this was a tremendously powerful, somewhat puzzling, and awesome statement that I knew I would have to live my way to. And so, of course, you must have freedom not only from fear, but freedom from hope and expectation. So shortly after this dream, I finished my degree in my bachelor's degree and in education, elementary education, and now I was looking for a job, but you couldn't get any applications in the very early 70s because they were inundated with teachers. And I had called many, many school districts within like a 50-mile radius of where I was living on the east end of Long Island, and I could not get even an application, no less an interview. But one day I was looking in the local telephone book for, I must have been in the L's, for somebody individual, but I came across the name Little Flower School. So it's a school. I called, and they said, yes, we're hiring. Come for an interview. So, longer story short, I went in for an interview. I drove through the grounds of a residential treatment center. It's a 250-acre residential treatment center on the east end of Long Island that was founded by the Order of St. Francis. And there's a public school still to this day on the grounds for children who have been abandoned, abused, and neglected, and rescued by Child Protective Services and sent out to this residential treatment center. So here I was driving through the grounds. As I learned about it during my interview is when I learned more about it. I didn't know anything about it other than to come for an interview, and it was a school. So he shared what he could about the school. So as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking of my dream, that these are the children, these are the children, I had been a child, like one of these children, who are being cared for still by this order now of St. Francis. And I got the job. So now my education begins. And so you could say here now my education truly begins, because true education is about character, and it's not, we all have to have, we don't all have to have, but many of us have to have and do acquire an academic education. But true education is heart to heart, and it is about development of character. So you might say that this was the beginning of my development of character, and certainly eventually my understanding of what is required for that development. And so it was very, very challenging, extremely difficult, severely emotionally disturbed children. And I was there for 5 years, and if not exactly each year, I got 3 messages. My sister Michelle and my mother traveled to Prashanti Nilayam, and when they went, I said, if you get an interview, would you please ask for a message for me? And over those years, I got 3 messages. One of them was, the first one, tell her she has a bad temper. And I did. I had lots of anger for many, many reasons. I had lots of blame and frustration. And I took it as a wonderful teaching. I took it as such a gift that this was something that I would have to work on, that I'd have to work on anger, my temper. And this school was the perfect place to have to do that, because you had very, very angry, damaged, emotionally damaged children there, very severely emotionally damaged children there from the traumas in their life. And you could not, they were very difficult to be, their behavior was very challenging to control. And so what I had to learn was I had to get a handle on my own anger if I was going to expect them to. So I had to learn how not to deal with life's challenging situations with your temper, but to be short-tempered. You have to become patient, you have to become more compassionate, you have to be more forbearing, you have to be more tolerant, and you have to do the self-inquiry and notice what is triggering you, what is triggering you, what is important for this child, what is important for that child. Selflessness became very important. So that was the first message. The second message was, Tell her that she is thinking some bad thoughts, some good thoughts, but some bad thoughts. So you can see how he was shaping me. He's sending me messages that will help me to move forward in my own spiritual development. And when he got that message, though, I said to myself, I have got to go to see him. Like that became my first, set my intent that I have to go see him because I don't want to have bad thoughts. I don't want to have any bad thoughts. And I didn't know exactly what he meant by bad thoughts. Some good thoughts, some bad thoughts. I didn't know exactly what he meant. And then I got another year went by. I did not have a lot of money at the time. I was separated. I was living on my own. I was raising the 2 children. You made very little as a teacher in those days. And so it wasn't as if I had the money to travel at the time. Well, actually, I didn't because I was working over the summers to augment my income. So one more message came, and that did it. My mother went in 1977 when Swami married my sister and my brother-in-law. They left to go off on their honeymoon, and my mother was still there. And in an interview, without my mother saying anything, he said, "Your oldest daughter is thinking all the time, should she come to India, should she come to India? Tell her to come and bring her 2 children." So now I had to have enough money for them as well. And sure enough, of course, the money came in 1979. I made my first visit. By the way, I just want to read that quote about education that is so important that I would come to understand. And that is, make sure that I can see it here. Education does not end with the accumulation of information. It must result in transformation of the habits, character, and aspirations of the individual. So during those years that I was teaching at Little Flower School, I was actually a student. I was Swami's student, and I was learning how to transform these negative habits that I had developed in this life to develop my character. Okay, so here's the pictures of my first visit to Prashanti Nilayam, and I actually took these 2 pictures, and I never again, the minute I snapped the second one, I knew that is not going to be when I am here. I want to be fully present. I'm not the observer. There are photographers who do that, and that's their sadhana. But mine was absolutely, you will never take another picture again, but I did manage to clip these first 2, and this looked what Prashanti Nilayam looked like at the time with the sand and the maybe 3 deep, rows 3 deep, and if you were in the 3rd row, you thought you were very, very far away. Yeah. And then the next picture is a beautiful picture of my mother at Darshan, a subsequent Darshan, not that year. But it's just, of course, you can see a very beautiful picture of her looking up at him lovingly. And, I always find that the pictures of Swami, front or back, the view of him giving darshan to his devotees is just as beautiful. It's like when you are on the darshan line, at least for me, I could never decide if he was coming close, whether to look at him or his feet, because it's all equally so awesome and so beautiful. While I was in Prashanti Nilayam, I was very uncomfortable, like most young Westerners. I did not know how to wear a sari. It was falling off all the time. It was so hot. I couldn't eat the hot food in the canteen, the little bit of peanut butter and crackers and things like that we had brought. I was rapidly losing weight. And, of course, I wanted some attention, and we weren't getting any particular attention. And then one day, I was sitting on the darshan line close to my mother, as it were, and this was on my first visit with my 2 children. Leela was she about 11 at the time, 11 or 12, and Dylan was about 7. or 8. And they were a handful. Here I brought them cold turkey, as it were, to India to see the Satya Sai Baba. And I did the best to prepare them, but I wasn't prepared. How can you possibly ever be prepared for this first encounter? Not possible at all. So I was sitting there very frustrated on the darshan line, and we were this front row of all three rows deep. We were front row. Swami comes walking by. My mother has a letter. So she hands it to me very fast, and she says, "You hand it to him. You hand it to him." So I hold it up, and he passes me by. He doesn't take the letter, and I'm really disappointed. I'm really disappointed. And he stops. And he turns around, and he comes back, he takes the letter, and he smiles just beautifully at me. And then he turns around again, and we were at the side of the temple, and then within 5 minutes or so it seemed, he was in the temple and darshan was over. So what was my first reaction? My first reaction was anger. I was so disappointed / angry that my feeling was, that's all. I mean, look at this, lack of understanding, humility. Look at this ignorance. That's all? That's all? And with that, I got up. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I got up. I walked behind the temple, which at the time there was nothing there, nothing but brambles and bushes. And then there was a hill. To some extent, it was a big hill behind the temple, and I started directly walking up the hill. I didn't bother getting my shoes. My feet were hurting from the stones and the thorns and the brambles, and I'm full of anger. And the anger just suddenly stops, but it's tears. So I'm crying. Now it's like I'm crying from the depths of my soul, for all of the frustration of life, for all of the frustration, for all of the disappointment. It was a primordial kind of crying. And when I finished crying, I was at the top of that hill / mountain, and I was in a profound state that I could only describe as divine love. I knew that he was God, that I was God, and it was a knowing, not a cognitive knowing. I knew that he was God, I knew that I was God, that everything was God, and that everything is love. And it is through love that we know, with a capital K, anything of value. And I stayed in that state for, I don't know how long. It was very hot, the sun was beating down on me, so whatever, I had no sense of time, and there was no thought, just this divine love. Except actually, you can't call it a thought, but I had a knowing that all of the religions were valid and true. This welled up in me, that every story in the Bible, every story in all of the scriptures, that there is a truth in it, that they are all true. And so that, of course, became the foundation for my role in the Satya Sai education. Particularly, I was the most vociferous spokesperson for the unity of faiths. I remember sitting at the World Council, the International Education Committee, when we were actually deciding what are the main components. What really are the main components of Satya Sai? The word educare was not used yet. That was a few years up the road. But when everyone was talking around the table, this big table from all around the world, Jamsai, Ardang Jamsai was there, and Victor Kanu, and nobody mentioned the unity of faiths, And so I was the big spokesperson for that, and naturally, to me, that's a major component of Bal Vikas, Satya Sai education, and human values. And I see that you are a multi-faith center. So how wonderful is that? Because, of course, they're all one. They're all one, just different, ways to express that same truth. So the next morning, we had an interview. And in that interview, he said to me, "I've come to you twice in dreams." So of course I remembered the dream, the Assisi dream. But after that interview, many, many other wonderful things took place in that interview. But that was, when I left the interview, that was predominantly on my mind. What would the second dream be? He's not going to make a mistake. What could have been the second dream? He called us for an interview the next day. And I was with my family at the time, with Michelle, I was with Richard, and they had a little baby. Sumana was about 3 months old. They had actually gone for a baby naming. My mother was there as well. And the next day, he called us for another interview. And that interview was an equal family in size and in not personalities, but in size, from India, an Indian family. And there's a young boy who Swami took into the back room for a thread ceremony. But prior to the thread ceremony, he materialized the thread. And he said to the young boy, "There is the red and the white is higher." And of course, he was mostly speaking in Telugu or Hindi, but every now and then, when he wants you to hear something, he'll speak in English, and there was the red and the white is higher. With that, he took the boy and the family in for the thread ceremony, and then came back and chatted with us and brought us back in one at a time as well. And that jogged my memory about the second dream. The second dream took place within days, if that, of that first dream. For whatever reason, I didn't recall it until then. And in that dream, equally, I was asleep. I dreamt that I awoke and that this Satya Sai Baba was actually in my room, and he was floating, as it were, in my room, and he communicated to me, "There is the red and the white is higher." So a very significant intent shaped in me after that second interview. I knew that I had to start learning, I had to start reading, I had to start understanding, I had to start someplace to understand what is the red and what is the white, and what does that mean, that the white is higher. And so in short, I will tell you what I came to discover over time, because that is not the substance of this talk, but what I came to discover over time. And I bet you if the true teacher in me were to ask you who in the group here thinks they can tell me what is the red and what is the white, I'll give you the full 30 seconds that it takes to formulate answers. Well, you have to give children a moment to think it through before the first one with the hand goes up, so that everyone has a chance to think it through. So, there are 3 gunas. The Rajaguna color associated with it is red. The Satyaguna, purity, the higher, is associated is white. So this was an indication to me, as I eventually came to understand that I was in a very Rajasic mode in my life, and that I needed to, some good thoughts, some bad thoughts. This was the answer to that question. That I was still in a very Rajasic mode in my life, and I was moving towards the Sattvic, but that was the direction I needed to go. And what is the movement towards the Sattvic? It's towards purity, goodness, clarity, compassion. It's the development of character, which requires a lot of self-inquiry. Satya Sai Baba has said that 75% of the spiritual path, and this would be true for any religion, 75% of it is self-inquiry. Everything else that we do that fosters devotion and that fosters inquiry, but the inquiry has to go along with it. So now, that was 1979, my first visit. And the next year I didn't go, and in 1981 I went, and just before I went I heard that there was going to be a conference on education of some sort there. And, I was now a teacher, and I was kind of hoping that I could be part of it. But I wasn't part of the Psi organization, so I mentioned it to my sister. I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could attend this conference when I was there? So she said, well, why don't you write him a letter? So I wrote him a letter, and I didn't expect, an answer in a letter form. But sure enough, when I got there, circumstances contrived that somebody invited me to be part of the conference. And so there, of course, the next question, which is ultimately has to be, how should I live my life? You could say that that was the theme. Of course, it was still Balvikas at the time. The education program was still Balvikas at the time. But it was through this and a subsequent conference that the concept of Satyasai education and human values came about. And as I mentioned, it was probably almost 10, 11, maybe 12 years later that the concept of educare became the umbrella for all of the Satyasai education programs. And so, how do you live your life? And it's basically laid out in educare or Satyasai education in human values. The 5 human values. And again, the unity of faith, including the self-inquiry, the introspection that is required on the spiritual path. And you could say on the human path, even if you don't say the spiritual path. To become a fully human, we have the capacity to know ourselves. So whether you're on a spiritual path or not, or you call it spiritual, if we are interested in becoming philosophically or scientifically or in any other regard a full human being, we need to become self-aware. They're the only creature that has self-awareness, the capacity to be introspective, to use, I'm going to say, the I ego personality, to question who am I, so that only I remains. Only I, no other. I am remains. I just want to double check on my time. So if you could give me lots. Good, okay. Okay, so that leads to how do I live my life? And shortly after that, I had a wonderful exchange with Swami. Swami went to Whitefield, and we all followed to Whitefield after that. And he called us for an interview in Whitefield. And that night, the night before this interview, because you don't know you're going to have one, but the night before, I had been dreaming. I had a big dream about home, people at home, and something that was significant to me. And when I woke up, I thought to myself, here I am in Prashanti Nilayam with Baba, and all I ever want to dream about when I'm at home is Baba. And when here I am here with Baba, and I'm dreaming about home. And shortly after that, we were called for interview, and before I walked into the room, he was standing at the door, but I was the last person to enter. And he sort of, somehow or another, you just know to sort of stop. And he said to me, when you are here, you are dreaming of home. When you are home, you are dreaming of here. It is all a dream. And with that, I went into the interview, and at one point in that interview, this picture was taken. So it is all a dream. What does that mean? Really, how to realize that truth. To be able to say it in words is one thing. To recognize that this is all a dream. And that Somehow when you'd go off to India, you'd think, oh, this is more real. This is real here. Now you're with the avatar, and you're sitting at darshan, and, this is reality. That was not reality either. That also is part of the dream world, the projected world that I like the word vyavaharika. The vyavaharika, this is the historical dimension, the projected dimension of physicality, and it is not real. And yet, we act in it as if it is. And we still have to go through some self-inquiry on occasion to ensure that the thoughts that obstruct us from the realization that this is all a dream, that I am I, we have to be able to still identify, when do those obstruct? What kind of attachment do I have to something that causes me to believe that this is real? I'm going to do a little aside that I hadn't planned on now, but I think it's perfect. I've been spending the last few years in California during the very, very cold months of the summer in Ojai, California. And there's a lovely Sai Center in Ojai, and I have one very special dear friend, Patricia Wing, who was also part of the education. She's a nurse. She was a nurse, part of the world of education in the Sai world. And a dear, 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 sweet, precious, divine friend. And she's dealt with a lot of physical karma, I'll say. She's had many surgeries, cancer, etc. And she just passed away. And we knew it was coming. And when I got the news that it was imminent, I started doing the Gayatri and thinking about her and sending. Not that sending is necessary, because you're already one. However, conventionally in the Vyavaharika, we send light, we say prayers, but it's all instant. There is no time, and it's just an intent. All you need is an intent to, that we send an intent somehow to that, to that person. And so I was very peaceful when I learned that she finally passed. Very, very peaceful. And the sense of the dream, was once again very powerfully with me. And I do want to say that night, I had a dream. And the former Satya Sai Baba didn't come in that dream. However, in that dream, everyone who, in this life, whoever died was in that dream. I mean, I recognized, my father's cousin, who died 50 years ago, and my uncle, my father's brother, and this one and that one. And there were many, 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 but I could only pick out a few. And I knew in that dream, once again, it's a wonderful dream, that we are all one. There's no separation. There's no separation. She hasn't gone anyplace. There's no beginning, there is no end, there is no birth, there is no death. It's all one, and it's all happening instantaneously in no time, in timelessness. So that's an aside I hadn't planned on, but that just occurred, and I just needed to say that about her and her exemplary life. Her son actually is the vice president of the region in California, Eric Wing, the Los Angeles region, whichever one that is, I believe. So yes, when you are here, you are dreaming of home. When you are home, you are dreaming of here. It is all a dream. And so what is real? What is permanent? What is impermanent? My dear friend Pat's body was impermanent. She's permanent. Not she, Patricia Wing, but that which constituted, enlivened, invigorated, and was the spirit and substance of that projection, Patricia Wing, is always. So once again, we've examined to some extent, who am I? I'm not this body. I'm not this mind. I'm not these thoughts. And yet, there is a cognizance and an awareness that can identify the thoughts that are obstructing that true reality. Trying to think of a recent thought that obstructed that reality, but I can't think of it at the moment. But if we all take all take a minute, we can think of a thought. It's usually around an attachment or a desire. Well, attachment and desire are almost the same. Or it's about an aversion or an attraction that says, I don't like that. Who is the I that doesn't like that? That is the illusion. As soon as we identify with this personality, I, I'm the mother, I should be treated this way. There are certain things that trigger us. But as soon as there's an I, we are in separate Vyavaharika identity, and it has obscured our true nature. To the extent that we are aware of it, it goes away like a passing cloud, as Swami says. And how should we live our life? We should live our life with that inquiry, moving towards truth, right action, peace, love, and nonviolence. So, in the book, The Power of Love, I chronicle more in detail all of these questions, the answers that I found to these questions, and what is the purpose of life? Which brings us to the question, what is the purpose of life? And so this was the second index card on the, this was the second index card that I had saved from that project many, many, many years before. I've kept these two index cards in the little table next to my bed for all of these years, these two cards. And every now and then I would reflect on them again. And so it just seemed appropriate to incorporate them into this talk. And this was also from the Satyasai Speaks, Volume 3, that I was working on. The glazing fire of jnana, which convinces you that all this is Brahman, will consume into ashes all traces of egoism and worldly attachment. You must become intoxicated with the nectar that word should be of, not or, with the nectar of union with Brahman. That is the ultimate goal of Dharma and of karma inspired by Dharma. So jnana. Jnana can be defined in many ways and perhaps understood in different ways. My understanding of jnana is ultimate knowledge, wisdom. And for me, that is absolute truth. Another word for this absolute truth is Brahman, or Brahman. And because this is a center, an interfaith center, another word for that truth could be Jesus, or Allah, or Buddha. In whatever way that absolute truth takes on meaning for you, or takes on form for you. For me, it's all of them. So I truly feel that I went on an exploration of the different faiths in this life, and I very tenaciously supported in every way I could the notion of the unity of faiths. And one of the things in my educational credits that I didn't include, but that I will mention now, the most recent one that I had the opportunity to do just prior to, of course, this pandemic, for the last 4 years, I have been teaching for a nonprofit organization called Rising Hope. I have been teaching at a medium security men's prison in New York. And the course that I teach, it's a full 30-credit course, which they get credit for towards their education if they choose to go on once they are out. The course that I teach is Introduction to the World Religions. And so this was just, this was sort of the cherry on the icing of the sweetness of the cake of this life that through Swami's grace, this life unfolded. Because, of course, I treated the course, it was not a comparative course on religion. It was a course on the 5 human values, on the unity of faiths. And I have to say that it was just an absolute joy to be able to talk about God, Brahman, Allah, because they have many different religions, men of many different religions and faiths in prison. And we had just wonderful conversations, and better than the conversations was the love in that room. The love in that room was so palpable, was so powerful. They could feel it, I could feel it. It was a known phenomenon. It was, actually acknowledged by everyone in this program as an extraordinary experience. So, of course, since this has happened, volunteers are no longer allowed in the prisons, so that has come to a temporary end, although we are starting correspondence courses. So the challenge will be how to make a correspondence course heart-to-heart. But with the topic of the Introduction to the World Religions, it's much easier than if you were teaching, public speaking, for example. But even there, you could find a way. If you're a Sai devotee and you apply the 5 human values and the 5 teaching techniques of storytelling, can't do music, but I can sing with them, and I occasionally do. So you can bring it in. So that's the importance of these teaching techniques, was that no matter where you are, no matter what you can or can't say, to the extent that you can say or not speak about God, those 5 teaching techniques elevate the conversation, the dialogue, as it were, in the classroom to a level of joy and love. And you can always talk about joy and love and experience joy and love in a classroom, even if you can't talk about God. So, what is the purpose of life? The purpose of life, as Swami said in that previous quote, is union with God, is to know Brahman, to know that you are that. And what is the way? Then that becomes the big question. What is the way? And for me, that answer came not because I was looking for an answer to this question at the time, but in retrospect, I can see that that has been the answer all along, was when I read the Bhagavad Gita Vahini, the Gita Vahini, Swami's teachings on the Bhagavad Gita. And I think it's always, I'm never quite sure, I double-checked, I think it's chapter 18. And fix thy thought on me, be devoted to me, you will reach me. This is what Krishna tells Arjuna. And of course, we are all Arjuna until we realize that we are also all Krishna. Fix thy thought on me, be devoted to me, you will reach me. And this was a mantra of mine in my devotion towards Swami that I used frequently in my life when I was overcoming difficulties. Fix thy thought on me, be devoted to me, you will reach me. And I have to say, Swami's grace, I feel that I have. And that's with total humility in knowing that that's his grace. You cannot look upon me through your own will. It is only through my grace. Ultimately, there is an element of grace, and what is that grace? It's inexplicable. Although I can actually divert it, being as I still have time, I can actually divert to just prior to my second or third visit, I think probably my second, after all of that we've talked about, prior to my second visit, which would have been in 1981, I woke up one morning feeling a little overwhelmed with all the things that I had to do, that I had to take care of before I was leaving for India, with thoughts about what would happen in India and the trip again. So I went back to sleep. I went back to sleep, and in that sleep, I had this dream. And in that dream, there was nothing but an orange, the fruit. Big, round orange. Nothing else, no story, no environment, just a big, round orange. And there was one piece cut out. And this message came. What do you want? You want a big piece, or you want a little piece? And with that, I woke up. And I understood that meant that I didn't know what the orange meant or anything like that, but that life has its difficulties. And do you want a big piece or a little piece? Because the result, there is a correlation between the results. You knew that. I didn't entirely know what that meant. But all of my anxiety and feelings of being overwhelmed about going off to India again were gone. So off I go to Prashanti Nilayam, and within a couple of days, after getting settled, after a couple of darshans, they had started these talks for Westerners. And many of the professors from the university would come and deliver those. Al Drucker was one Westerner. Al Drucker was living there at the time, and he would give talks. And Kasturi and Kasturi's son, and a number of wonderful other professors would come. So off I went to a lecture for the Westerners, and the speaker chose a topic, and I don't recall his name. I remember what he looks like. He wasn't any of the individuals that I just mentioned. Maybe the name will come to me later. But he stood up and he said, "Today I'm going to talk about karma, will, and grace. You are handed an orange. That is karma. How you peel it and eat it, that is your will. And the reward for your effort, that is his grace." So that was within a week of my dream about the orange. The reward for your effort. So there's this element of grace that is very, and it exists for everybody and all human beings. So when we say his grace, what is the his we're talking about? We are talking about the divine that has no form, that has no one religion. We are talking about the formless divine grace that touches every human being. And to the extent that we recognize it as grace, that to me is the grace, is to recognize that. And so, now, what is the way? I think that everybody in this room, if we were in a circle and we were asked, well, what is the way now to know that truth, to know oneself, to live one's life? For me, the answer is in Satya Sai Baba's notion that he has offered us of constant integrated awareness, CIA. Constant integrated awareness is awareness on many different levels, all at the same time, again, in timelessness. We all have a sense of duality, to some extent or another, to live in this Vyavaharika stage, the play of life. In duality, there is a subject and an object. There is me, and there is God. There is God's grace, but it's separate. There is me, there's my wife, there are my children, there are my friends. There's a separateness, and yet there's a respect. There's a way to live our life in dual awareness, dual consciousness. And that way is the 5 human values, self-inquiry, the movement towards true self-knowledge. And it's always remembering, fix thy thought on me, be devoted to me, you will reach me. And in my early days, in visiting Swami and in my life, teaching at Little Flower, raising my children, my awareness, my consciousness was predominantly in that stage of duality. There is me, there's the children I'm teaching, there are my colleagues, there are my children. There was this ego identity that was predominant. Then there is a stage of qualified non-dualism. And I know all of you know this, but what I do find about all of us is that we make meaning out of Satya Sai Baba's teachings. We all make meaning a little bit differently, in a little different way. That's the beauty of it. That's why there's so many volumes and so many Vahinis. And each one of us conceptualizes our spiritual path or the spiritual path or the purpose of life in a slightly different way. This is ultimately how it has unfolded for me. So in this awareness, this kind of state of mind or being, as it were, qualified non-dualism, there is the subject and there is an object, but that object is within me. That object is not separate from me. God is within me. Jesus is within me. Buddha is within me. Allah is within me and speaks to me and protects me and guides me. There is still a separateness. There is me, and there is that form of God that is within me. Still, one thinks, fix thy thought on me, be devoted to me, and you will reach me. And ultimately, in the state of non-duality, Advaita, there is no separate subject and no separate object. God and I are one. Fix thy thought on me, be devoted to me, you will reach me. The ultimate so-called reaching, and there is no reaching, and there actually ultimately is no achievement. There actually ultimately is no enlightenment, that you suddenly have an enlightenment moment. It's already there. It's already within us. And it is just a matter of our living our life until the illusion and the ignorance drop away. And for me, that is His grace. So, in the very last part of this, in the, once again, who am I? I'd like to actually read a little something in the epilogue to my book before we talk about this slide. So this came, many, many, many years later. Actually, this was in 2001. And I was sitting in the darshan line. And of course, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people there from all countries all over the world. And I'm sitting quietly in my section. I've finally come to not expect anything, just to be, to sit, just to enjoy the sitting and the being, noticing at the most. And so this is my journal entry in July 2001. Today at morning darshan, a young girl, perhaps 12, was sitting behind me with her brother, he seemed to be about 8 or 9 years old. Her mother and grandmother had gone into the mandir to sing bhajans and left this young girl in charge of her brother. In a very sweet and low voice, she was pleading with and admonishing him to behave. Please stop that now. Swami will not be pleased with your behavior. This is darshan of Swami. Why do you behave? I don't know what he was doing. It wasn't disturbing me. I hadn't turned around yet. I was just listening to her sweetly admonish him in this way. So this is Darshana Swami. Why do you behave like this? He would not like it. You must behave, and so on. I didn't turn around to see what he was doing, so I don't know what it was. It couldn't have been too much, as it wasn't bothering me sitting right in front of them. But he was certainly doing something that this very composed young girl believed was not right. Finally, he says to her, behavior is not so important. Behavior isn't everything. And she says, yes, it is. And what then do you think is important, she says to him. The news, he says. The news is important. She seemed to be taken aback and not knowing what to say. Why the news, she asks. He comes back with, because everything is in there. Well, I was thoroughly enjoying this little play. This little girl was so responsible, I thought. So now I couldn't resist. I turned around with a smile on my face and said to him, casting a supportive glance to his sister, well, the news is all about behavior. It's about how the prime minister is behaving and how the president is behaving and how countries are behaving and how movie stars are behaving. The news is about behavior. He smiled and seemed to know that this conversation had come to a fitting conclusion. I added, still smiling, behavior is Dharma, and Swami has come to establish Dharma. And with that, bhajans began. So, all knowledge is useless if one has not acquired self-knowledge. Dharma is both a path and ultimately, you could say that in self-knowledge, Dharma is everything, Satya is everything. Truth, right action, peace, love, nonviolence culminate in a unity in which everything is known to be God. Everything is divine love. All knowledge is useless if one has not acquired self-knowledge. Knowledge of the self alone is eternal. And so I don't know if I'm going to be ending this on a early, or we can always do some questions and answers if you would like. But I do have one story about this. If you were to walk outside and look at the license on my car, is a U-M-I-M-U. Those letters, exactly like that, in caps. And so where did I get this? So after I finished that dissertation, which Swami had blessed it, I did actually have an interview once where I explained that I was doing my dissertation on Satyasai and education and human values, and he said, very happy, very happy. And now it was published in 1991, and so this was close to 5 years later, 1996 or so, that I was in Prashanti Nilayam, and I had actually brought two copies of the dissertation, which was by then, bound in a book form. And one I donated to the library there, and the other I brought with me because a friend from Mexico who was involved in the Satyasai had asked me about research, because that was the key thing about a dissertation, is you do research. So I had to do research on Satyasai education and human values, and I did it in public school settings and in after-school daycare center in New York, Chicago, and in California. Over a year's study of the implementation. That's why the complicated study of the implementation of a curriculum innovation for character development, typical language of academia. But you have to be very specific in your research. So I had it with me because I wanted to go over how you do the research and show that to her because she was interested in it. But I hadn't brought it for any other reason than that. And then she said to me, have you offered this to Swami yet? And I said, no, I haven't offered one to Swami. And I explained I gave one to the library, and I know he blessed it, and I've never had the inclination to do that. She says, oh, you must do that. You must do that. Well, I had about 3 days left for this visit. And I had no desire whatsoever, because I had learned to just sit and be. And I didn't want to disturb that darshan with any desire for anything. And so that was those were my thoughts before I went to sleep that night. And when I woke up in the morning, it was as clear as a bell that I needed to bring that to darshan. That I needed to bring it to darshan with me, and whatever would happen, but I needed to bring it to darshan with me. And so I had not had an interview for at least 5 years at that point in time, and I didn't anticipate one or desire one. But I took the book nevertheless. I hid it very discreetly, in my sari, and I sat down. I was given first row at that time because I had that privilege on occasion, and especially they knew I was leaving in a couple of days. And so I got a front row, and sure enough, Swami comes by. He looks at me, and he says something like, "How many days?" I don't think he said anything like that to me, hadn't said anything like that to me in years. And I think I said 2, and he said, "Go." And so off I went on that precious walk to the temple, which all of us who have had that opportunity can know to be such a divine experience. And so sure enough, there I am now, and he took me into a private interview room with this wonderful, very dignified woman from Singapore. I think she was an attorney. She always wore a red flower in her hair. And I didn't know her. I knew her from darshan, but I didn't know her personally. But she and I were in this interview together, and it was very, very different. She had a tray and things to give him and feed him and talk to him in such a personal way. And I was just sitting there noticing how beautiful it was to witness that. And then he turns to me and with this and there's this silence for a minute. And he says, "Oh," and I hold up the book, and he says, "Oh, what is that?" So I said, "Oh, this is my dissertation." And I said, gave him the long name, the whole thing. He takes the book, he looks through it, and smiles. And then he goes back to the beginning, as it were, of the book, and he's still looking at it, and then he looks at me and he says something that I cannot make out. He says something like, you, I can't, what, Swami, what? And again, he says it in such a barely distinctive, and I can't make it out. What, Swami, what? So he points to this page. Well, the page that he points to in the book is the page that identifies where you can find the dissertation. University Microfilms International. And then he points to it and he says, "You am I am you." And he kept it. And so I have that "You am I am you" on my license plate. And I use it all the time, especially up in the prison, to underscore what do we mean by unity. You am I am you. There's no difference. No difference. Body may look different, color may look different, language, speech, accent may be different, background may be different, but you am I am you. No difference. And so with that, once again, I just have to say Swami's grace to be able to share these stories with you. And thank you so much. And may Swami's presence and true reality that we are always remain with us. Sai Ram.
Actually, I'm really, from this talk, I thought I'll just probably mention that. So this was going back in April 2010. We had a pre-world conference in Orlando. And I was part of so we were conducting workshops. So 20 or 25 of us were selected. And my group, there were 25 people. If we would get around and talk about, and my topic was on service, obviously. And then after the 2-day of conference, we had to give a summary, So that was on a Sunday afternoon. We had to, like what our group had decided. So that was a synopsis of. So what had happened was, I had one of the groups. Ronne also led one of the groups. I think her was 20, mine was group 12, my brother was group 11. So on that day, Sunday morning, around about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I had in the dream, I'm dreaming that I'm bleeding from my nose very profusely. Blood is coming out. So that obviously, I was very frightened. I said, how, and I see from side angle, I'm facing the audience, while trying to give the synopsis to the audience, I'm bleeding. And so this was a very profound dream. So I said, well, what I should do is take a lot of, carry napkins and all that. So when the moment came to give my turn for this synopsis, I had a lot of napkins in my pocket here, and I gave my summary, and then nothing happened, and I'm kind of surprised. So again, I go back to my corner, and I'm sitting there. Ronne comes in, and from the stage, she is giving her summary, and all of a sudden, she is bleeding from the nose. Do you remember that, Ronne? Yeah, and we all rushed to give, and I said, you know what? Swami has taught me this profound lesson that we are all one, because in the dream it was me who was bleeding, and in actuality Ronne was bleeding. So I just wanted to share this with you, but to me, when you talk today about this being one, we are all one, that really came, and I think through this experience it highlighted that we are all one.
This is so amazing, because as soon as you mentioned that dream, I'm saying to myself, well, I had nosebleeds during that Orlando conference, and I didn't know what it was from, as it subsequently turned out to be high blood pressure, but that is amazing. I'm standing on the stage and my nose started bleeding.
Exactly.
I said,
That's amazing.
When I was saying, was saying everything same, except, it was Ronne, not me. And to me it was a profound...
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
today, so that's so fantastic. Wow, thank you for that.
Great example of unity.
Oh.
But Ronne, I have a question for you, if you have the time.
Yes.
Clearly you have demonstrated the ability to introspect, go inwards. Something drew you to Parthi in the days when even many people in India themselves did not know Swami and they were not coming there. And you went all the way from here to there to experience it. So, in your journey inward, how did you, or what guidance did you get from Swami or within yourself about how to overcome the Maya that Bhagavan himself creates all the time? No matter how much you want to be aware, you talked about being aware of this being not being the reality.
Ronne, you could come down here and answer. It's better,
I think that would
if you
be
don't
good.
mind. Thank you.
Because that is not a very easy question to answer. I had kind of hoped that a lot of what I said in the talk would point to some of those answers by asking the question, who am I? Who am I? What is real? What is not real? All the time. That's the inquiry that is going on. And the answers come. The answers come internally as we develop our character, our compassion. We learn how to get quiet. We learn how to be open and listen more. Now, I also think there's an element. You've said something that I do want to address when we say that this Maya that Bhagwan creates. Now, to me, when you say this Maya that Bhagwan creates, this is subject-object. There is me, and there is Bhagwan, and there is God, meaning there is God, and God creates this Maya. This is not separate. God, you are God, and to the extent that you believe this to be real, you are creating the Maya. The Maya comes out of us. We are God. I don't see it as, I understand that the way the Bible is interpreted literally, for example, there's the literal interpretation, the dual interpretation, the qualified non-dual, and the non-dual. Looking at it from the non-dual perspective, there is no Maya outside of you. There is nothing creating that Maya outside of you. That Maya is nothing but a thought. This is a tree. Is that true? Who told you that was a tree? That concept tree, you've been taught that it was a tree. We are not born with the knowledge that this is a tree. This is a foot. This is a mother. This is a father. All of this is acquired through birth. Now, there's a great mystery. Why do we take birth? I am not going to even pretend to know the answer to that or even entertain the answer to that. But when I was very little, when I was about 3 or 4, about 4, and I lived in an apartment in Brooklyn, a small little apartment in Brooklyn on the 6th floor. And there was a chair in front of a window in this little living room. And I was standing on the chair looking out the window. Now, this window looked out into a courtyard. It didn't look out onto the street or other buildings. You could only look at that. You could see some, it was a square. There was a building on that side. There was this building. But as a 4-year-old, and it was nighttime, and all I could see was my reflection, as if that was a mirror. And I remember the thought came to me, which one is real? This one or that? Which one is real? To be born with that question, it's also a mystery, but that question arises in us, in all human beings, at some point in time, in so-called past lives or so-called future lives. Because there's no past life, really. There was no past life in Assisi. That is now, in this instant, this timeless moment, all of this seemingly occurs. To the extent that I believe any of this is real, that is the Maya. When I can take a walk in the morning, go for a quiet walk and see beyond the tree, beyond the so-called sky, beyond the cloud. And I have a morning walk that was influenced by a wonderful spiritual teacher out there. She would never call herself a spiritual teacher, and she would never call herself a teacher. But Byron Katie has written several books with the premise, loving what is. Ultimately, she is a non-dualist. Her experience in life where everything dropped away and she knew that she saw past the illusion and then had to be able to take on the illusion in order to be in the world so that you could speak and share it, because basically that's all teaching is sharing. And so I've read a number of her books, very impressed, and I went to one of her School for the Work, because I was in Ojai, and she had this called School for the Work, and it was a 9-day intensive, morning to night, and on these, what she calls her 4 questions and a turnaround. I share this because it happens to be an exquisite method, And it's out there now. It wasn't out there earlier in my life, and I don't know that I would have come to it earlier in my life anyway. And it's part of any path, any religion. It's not a philosophy, it's not a psychology. It's simple dhyana yoga. Notice any belief, any judgment, no matter how trivial, and ask yourself, is it true? Can you be second question, can you be absolutely certain that it's true? Can you be absolutely certain that that's a tree? How do you know that that's a tree? That is a concept that you were taught, part of the illusion. Possibly a necessary part of the illusion, because that is a street and there are cars on it, and you want to be careful not to walk into a car when it's moving. And she does a morning meditation walk. I've also done a morning meditation walk with Thich Nhat Hanh. You know, I've had a great, because I've been a lover of the different religions, you know, I have had experiences and met various Buddhist teachers, Hebrew teachers, Christian teachers, Richard Rohr, and had personal experiences with them. So I've done a walking meditation with Thich Nhat Hanh before he was somewhat incapacitated by a stroke in Plum Village in France on my way to and from India one year. And she also does a walking meditation, and I'm going to share my experience of this walking meditation, which all I can do is share my own experience that may help answer your question. And so in this, every morning we would go for this walk, start the day with this silent walk in small groups throughout the property where we were staying at the Ojai Valley Inn, as it were. And she will have you, she just asks you, as you walk very silently, very slowly, very meditatively, just notice what you're seeing without a story. Just notice what she calls first generation concept. Tree, flower, sky. And as people walk, and they would share after that, everybody had very different experiences doing that, and I will share mine. So as I continue to do this walk, maybe the second or third day of this walk, I began to realize, of course, these are all elements. So my walk became earth, sky, earth, air, water, fire. Earth, air, water, fire. Earth, air, water, fire, molecules, neutrons, protons, particles, empty. Particles are empty. Emptiness. Particles are empty. Emptiness. Emptiness. God. Love. Manifestation. Diversity. Elements. Tree. Flower. Sky. Dissolution. Manifestation. Creation. Dissolution. Preservation. In a timeless state. Timelessness. Beyond concept. Beyond the concept of Maya. Beyond the concept of Swami. Beyond the concept of Brahman. Beyond concept.
That was a very good answer. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
I'll just expand this non-duality into a little bit more current, so to speak.
Yes.
In addition to being here at Sarva Dharma, I'm a member of another multi-faith group in this county, and we meet occasionally. And one of the discussions that came up the other day was about racism and the current situation with that, and how we deal with it. And in the process of discussion, there was a question: how does non-duality help us in solving this current situation? That was the question. I did give them an answer, maybe a circuitous, like they got confused, but I would like to know, what do you think of that? Is there a role of non-duality or non-dualism in solving day-to-day problems, such as?
Let's see, where would I go with this?
Sorry if I gave you a difficult one.
Wherever, to me, whenever there is thought, questions that require an answer requires thought. That can only take place when there is a state of duality or qualified non-dualism. In the state of non-duality, there are no questions, there are no answers to be discovered. But in the other two states, we use the I to eliminate the I so that there is only I. Constant integrated awareness. Non-duality, constant integrated awareness is fully integrated, as I see it. Prior to that, there's that little bit of separation, little bit. Not a bad thing. Still pretty wonderful. Does that answer that?
The way I answered the question at the time was that non-dualism itself means that there are no two. There's only one.
Yeah.
So if there's only one, there's no you and there's no I.
Yes.
So if there's no you and I, there's no black, there's no white, there's no brown, there's no yellow.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a state that you have to be in rather than make others come to it. Yeah. What we're trying in solving the problem of racism is to make others feel that no, what I'm doing, differentiating between the two is wrong, I should be coming together. That I cannot make somebody else do it. I have to do it myself. And so this is not a social gathering discussion. This is something that you Atma Bodha, learn to yourself, teach yourself. So that's how I ended, but I don't think I got a good, I wouldn't say response, but.
Well, thank you for that. Sometimes non-duality is treated as a philosophy. And when it's treated as a philosophy, there's an examination of it as a philosophy, and questions like that arise. How can you use it? Only when it is a concept can it be used by the monkey mind. But ultimately, it is a state.
Yeah, I wanted to skip my question, but then when he brought that up, I said, looks like I have to bring that question. This is about this is related to my experience one time when I was in my home outside in the garden. He was there, my husband, outside, and there's a butterfly, tiny butterfly. It's sitting on a flower. I go crazy, touch it and say, "Butterfly, you're going to come with me." And then the thing came into, from finger. How long does a butterfly stay? 2 seconds, a second, they fly. Me and him went around a walk around the house for at least 10 minutes. It was sitting on me, came all the way and came back. That answers this question. You and I are one. You have to be that thing, and then they become one with us. So any color, white, brown, the butterfly was orange. So when we develop that sense, it just happens.
Yes, beautiful.
It happens, and it takes time. It's what you believe and what you live through it. It's an experience, and the more you do, I can connect to people. I can connect to animals.
Yes.
Sometimes talk to them like stupid, and then they react to me.
Yes.
So
Beautiful.
That
Yes.
was my answer to him.
Very
Thank you.
beautiful. Thank you for that.
With that, we come to the end of this Samarpan program now. I'd just like to thank Dr. Marantz for coming by, and we would like to give you a little token of our appreciation for your coming all the way here.
Oh my goodness, how absolutely beautiful. Oh, Swami's Grace, thank you so much. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much.